All right, well, welcome. We are here today to talk to Roger Urbaniak, the CEO of SolidHighGround. And Roger, why don't you tell us a little bit about how the company started, what was your inspiration, and basically how did this ball get rolling?
Sure, Jay. Year and a half, 2 years ago, I went to Westport. I was interested in working with them to see if I could develop a community center that they could use. And I sat in with different committees that they had, and it took very little time that I discovered that what they really needed, instead of just a community center, is more relief from a potential earthquake and tsunami. I mean, we build a community center, and earthquake hits, it's wasted money basically, and so we started back then to look at why the whole earthquake tsunami scenario that affects the coast. And I happened to be in the place to see Westport was the only people that had successfully received a $19 million grant to build one shelter on the top of an elementary school. And so I knew that what they had done. I got a chance to look at that, and then I got a chance to reach out and see what other communities were trying to do. And for 20 years, people have known that the odds are very good that the West Coast is going to get a tsunami, and yet there's no tsunami shelters, or there's no vertical, no ability for vertical high evacuation that's there. And so I really kind of decided I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and see if I can't solve some of the problems and get these vertical evacuation things going.
Okay, so considering the fact, as you pointed out, that to date there's precisely one, at least as far as we know, there's one tsunami shelter on the entire West Coast. And given FEMA and other organizations' conclusion that we need X number of these things, there's obviously a fundamental problem why they're not getting built. So what's unique about SolidHighGround's approach to this problem, and how is SolidHighGround going to successfully get these vertical evacuation structures built?
Well, one of the things I had to do was try to isolate the different problems that were keeping communities from successfully starting construction. And what they invariably, communities seemed to think the only source of financing was some government grant situation, and they would hire grant writers, and invariably the other problem was they thought that whatever structure they built had to fit all situations. It had to be the biggest and the best, and that's what the grant was going to be written for. Well, there's not that kind of money floating around. I mean, $19 million, and knowing that if you look at the problem, when an earthquake hits off the Cascadia, the Cascadia Fault, let's say a 9.0 earthquake, how it's going to affect Westport is there's a process called liquefaction in sand that will collapse the roads. You can't drive out of town when an earthquake of that magnitude hits. And so you're going to have to, if you're going to avoid the wave that's going to follow within 30 minutes, you're going to have to get to some high ground that's taller than that wave coming in. Otherwise, you're going to get washed away. And all those studies say that 80 to 90% of the people that are either living there or vacationing there won't make it. So what I'm trying to do is save some lives. I mean, I need to get some structures built that will allow people to get up above the wave and survive that situation.
Okay, so there's a number of variables here, and I think that in our discussions it's become pretty clear that the demographics of the places where these shelters are most needed is such that they don't have the tax base to build these things. So with regard to the structure of the company, like SolidHighGround being a 501c3 or however it's organized, and the working with the communities for permitting, etc. What is the approach, or how is the approach unique that SolidHighGround is taking with respect to working with the communities for permitting and such?
Okay. Well, how I visualize these structures going together is my company basically is intending to have the community ask us for a grant in which we will develop the structure cost-free to the community, and the structure will be a shell-like structure that's very versatile. They can use it however in many different ways that might solve problems in the community, whether it's attracting tourism or whether it's providing office space or whatever that they feel that they need a structure to do. I mean, this structure is not just going to sit there unused for the next 50 years waiting for the tsunami thing. It needs to fit in with the community. And once the community comes up with a viable use, and we help them with the $1.5 million cost of this shell structure, I want them involved with, okay, you're a partner. You're going to own this when we're all done. You have to come up with the land. You bring the utilities to the property. Any secondary improvement to the property, like parking, restrooms, enclosing the structure, etc., the community is going to pay for that. But that being said, once they do, they get the revenue that is generated from having a viable use for that building, whether they have concerts on the roof and charge for the concerts and tourists come, or however it works out, they get the income from it, and that is going to help them pay for their portion of the cost of developing this property.
Okay, so what would you say is the primary reason why these things haven't been built up to this point?
Well, again, that financing aspect is part of it, and having this structure that envisioning this structure that will cover all situations, and building the grandest structure that can be imagined regardless of the cost. You can't get financing for that type of thing. So you have to set some realistic goals of hey, what do we need to do to get a structure that our community can use and afford to have. If you get a mindset that goes along that line, and instead of having the government permit it as a tsunami shelter, permit it locally as a community event center that the structure meets certain requirements. The engineering is solid enough and strong enough to withstand a 9.0 earthquake and at least a 15-foot tsunami wave. We can provide that kind of engineering even in a sandy, location, with the geotechnical results, etc. And that is likely 90% of the scientists say, basically there's a 1 in 3 chance that we'll get a tsunami in the next 50 years. And that being said, 90% of the possibility of that tsunami coming is that it won't exceed a 9.0 earthquake and it won't exceed a 15-foot wave. So if you design to that, you can afford the $1.5 million structure as opposed to a $19 million structure, and you can start getting some of these things built. If you a city the size of Westport, you've got 30 minutes to get to high ground once that ground starts rumbling and the sirens go off, etc. And depending on where you're at, in the community, you can only go about 2 miles in 30 minutes. And so a city the size of Westport needs probably 8 of them. Something like Ocean Shores probably needs 12. You can't have $19 million structures. You have to have structures that somewhat pay for themselves and have limited cost, for that investors basically will, that are people that are interested in saving lives are willing to put some money down to help communities improve themselves and save lives.
Okay. So this is a little bit off topic, but if you could elaborate a little bit about the rules-making entities like FEMA and where they're going as far as specifying what the requirements are for a quote-unquote tsunami shelter.
Well, I mean, if you want to, this grand scheme of one building fits everything type thing, right now, there's been only one shelter built in the last 20 years, and the design requirements are somewhere between a 500 and 1,000 year storm. FEMA is now changing that requirement to make it, you have to comply with a 2,500 year storm.
Earthquake.
Nobody can afford that. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, if people can't afford this, you're playing Russian roulette with people's lives.
Yep.
I mean, if the longer it takes for these buildings to be built, again, it's 1 in 3 in the next 50 years. They thought of this 20 years ago. This thing could happen tomorrow. Yeah. We've got to start construction on some of these shelters soon.
Yeah.
The sooner the better. And the more of this, if we can get a couple of prototypes up there and the community say, hey, this works. I can use it in my community. This solves a problem. We need office space. We need, rooftops to, for concerts, or we need, food markets down, down below, or, whatever it is, whatever the community needs that will generate income and community spirit. That's what these buildings are for, and
okay.
that's what the problems that they solve.
Okay, so you personally, you've been at this effort for 1.5 years plus, and you've expended your own resources to do all kinds of engineering and design, and as is evident based on the design that you can see on the website. So I think we have a good idea why cost is important, but why are you seeking a partner at this point?
Well, basically, I'm a very limited show, and at the point that this program needs to go further, literally hundreds of these structures are needed in order to be prepared for the event that we know. I mean, science says it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And it needs a big team to go out there and work with the community. Where do you want to put the building? What use are you going to put it to? How are we going to handle the financing from the community side? How are we going to raise the funds from the 501c3 internet requirement? All of the paperwork that's involved, that's a bigger scale than I'm capable of putting together. I need a partner, basically, that can step in and help me put together a team of people that will solve all those problems and make the project go forward.
Okay, so you being a commercial real estate guy of 40 plus years, what do you bring to the table as a partner in this effort?
Some basic understanding of permitting, some basic understanding of cost, of construction management from some of the projects that I've worked through, but mostly sales. I mean, to sit down with a community and say, what do you really need? And show them the economics of, okay, if somebody gives you, a structure, in your community, here's how you can afford to pay it. Can we work together on putting this thing together? I think that I basically would fit in with a larger organization in terms of being one of the point people that can sit down with communities and show them how these structures can work for them.
Okay, so another thing that I want to point out here is that you bring to the table some expertise that you've gleaned from your working with perhaps the premier tsunami technology entity that exists, which is Oregon State University. So you bring a lot, you bring a lot of expertise as well that you've gone out and acquired for yourself. So that's something that I've noticed. What are the goals of the company, and what is the timeline that you envision?
Well, the timeline is going to be, driven by when's the next earthquake and tsunami coming. I mean, and the faster the better. The longer it takes to get these structures built, the more at risk we're putting people's lives, and that's not something that to be taken lightly. I mean, that's not just words. That's real lives that are going to be lost when the tsunami hits. And so I want to get going. Get this project. Get this company ready to start pouring concrete and making these structures ready for people to occupy as soon as I can. And what I need is a partner that is like-minded to sit down and let's work out the details. What can you do? What do you want me to do? And I don't have any real firm and fast ways that it has to be done. I need to know who my partner is first and what works for them, and how we can work together.
Okay. Well, just from my perspective and my involvement in the project up to this point, it's very exciting to me to be part of a project where we can foresee and we can visualize a goal of actually solving this problem and getting these structures built. And I think that when you present it that way and you provide a mechanism for the public or for anybody of like mind to contribute to this effort, we're going to find it's very encouraging, and it makes me think that these things are actually going to finally get built. Well, Roger, thank you for taking the time to talk with us today, and look forward to what we have going in the future.
Okay, thanks, Jay.
Yep.